Next up, we have Anil John. He's the Program Manager for Cybersecurity at the Department of Homeland Security. Honestly, the expert on blockchain from DHS. So please.
Thank you. I do not have slides. I do not have anything to sell you. And I do not have a booth out there. So I am one Fed who has, whether fortunately or unfortunately, seemed to have ended up with the blockchain security and privacy portfolio for DHS. And I wanted to share some of the lessons learned that have come out of our investments and our proof of concepts that are moving out in that particular area. Again, in the talk here, there was a significant amount of conversation about the government is not doing much. They're on the beginning stages, so why should you listen to me when I talk about lessons learned? So I want to set a little bit of context there as well. So our entry into blockchain was 3 years ago. It was, there was not, you could not, as is currently, run into and trip over a blockchain working group when you stepped out of your door at that time. And our interest at that point in time was very much focused on both the security and the privacy aspects of it. If you have been in that space before, confidentiality, integrity, availability, these are all principles that have stood the test of time. We were very interested in finding out whether or not this distributed ledger / blockchain technology could actually support them. On the privacy side, pseudonymity, selective disclosure of information, is that something that could be supported by blockchain technology? That was our entry. It was not a, let's jump into a proof of concept, let's jump into a pilot. So given that, there are some lessons learned that came out of that that I wanted to convey to you, but I also wanted to set the terminology straight, because I think in a lot of these conversations, we blur what is meant by a proof of concept and what is meant by R&D, what is meant by a pilot, and what is meant by an operational deployment, and everybody sometimes are left with the impression that you're doing more or less than what somebody's trying to convey. Right? Fundamental R&D, we're not in that business. People like DARPA, NSF are. I work for DHS Science and Technology Directorate, which is both the R&D arm and the science advisor to our department. So we are very much interested in technologies from a applied research and an advanced development side of it with a direct operational impact. So from that perspective, a lot of the work that we did was not around, let's look at the use case first, because that came later. We started from, what are the holes in this technology that you sort of need to fill in if it actually needs to operate at the level of security and privacy that government needs in order to execute on its business processes. Right? So that was a piece. The next piece, obviously, is the proof of concept. It is trying to prove out the technology in a context that is not using real data. It is showing that the technology can work. That, if it is successful, you move out to a pilot, which is an operational deployment with a very small selected set of users, and finally with operational acquisition and deployment. Our focus has been on the R&D, and currently in the proof of concept stages. We're moving at least in one area into the pilot side. And it's interesting in that a lot of people here, we're doing pilots, we're doing proof of concepts. We've been doing this for 3 years, so what are the concerns that we have in this particular space? So I'm not as enthusiastic and blindly leading the charge into the blockchain currently. So I wanted to articulate some of the concerns that we have. One of them is a question that was asked earlier. How do you sort of determine in blockchain technology is actually appropriate for your use? I'll simply note that 80 to 90% of the use cases that are being thrown off a blockchain can be done with existing mature technologies and a good solid dev team and a kick-ass architect that is designing the solution, right? So there are very few use cases that actually touch upon blockchain. We do actually have a heuristic and a flow chart that sort of helps you determine if the use case that you currently have is indeed applicable for a blockchain itself. We've shared it publicly before. Google DHS S&T blockchain, you'll find it sooner or later. If not, please contact me and I'd be happy to share that as well. The other piece of it is there are a set of lessons learned, but I want to focus on some things that I think we sort of hand-wave over in a lot of these blockchain conversations, which is around the area of interoperability and not getting locked into a particular vendor's solution in your environment. In that particular area, I'll simply note that if you are looking, when we talk about ledgers, ledgers imply data, ledgers imply semantics. You are writing data or reading data from the blockchain. Every single blockchain vendor currently, and please, I'd be happy to see somebody who is not doing this, is going to currently have a proprietary way of writing that stuff to the blockchain that is not interoperable with any other vendor's blockchain implementation. That results at this point in time an ecosystem where you are forced to choose a particular vendor and you are locked into their data format on how you structure the data. That is a concern. That is something that you need to watch. Again, early stages of that technology. The other piece of it is something that was brought up earlier as well. I live in perpetual fear of two words being used together, which is blockchain and biometrics. Right? So the concern that we have is that there is a narrative out there that it is feasible to share, put private data or PII data or any type of sensitive data on the blockchain, and that is okay because we're using the magic of encryption, right? The reality is that whether it is through Moore's law or whether it is through challenges in implementation, sooner or later, your encryption algorithm and ciphers will get broken or will become obsolete, which is how, we move from, whatever SHA 56 to 256, whatever the increment that is going to be next, right? The long and the short of it is you combine a mechanism that will eventually become obsolete with a ledger that is supposed to be immutable, and the combination of those things used to store private data is an incredibly bad path. So from that perspective, there are some specific anti-patterns that you need to use. How do you ensure that you have the ability to use the ledger and the chain itself to validate private data without actually putting that private data on the chain? How do you provide an interoperable pointer from the chain to off-chain solutions so that you're not actually sharing data privately, but you still have the ability to basically do what you need to do from a business process perspective? So from that piece of it, I'll talk about, I'm a big fan of the fact that basically you should not just complain about what the problems are. You should actually provide solutions and approaches to moving forward as well. There are two areas that, from the DHS perspective, that we are focusing on how to address those two pieces. One of them is specific anti-patterns and best practices that we articulate to our dev teams, that thou shalt not put private data, sensitive data on the chain. It will always be pointed off the chain. The challenge with that is if you are pointing from the chain to a resource off the chain, how do you do it in a manner that is interoperable, that is actually understood across multiple implementations, which is precisely why we are actually working through international standards organizations like W3C on something called the Decentralized Identifier Specification, right? DIDs. Great amount of traction from folks like IBM, Microsoft, and a variety of others. Again, it provides a meaningless but unique number that allows you to provide a pointer to off the chain that is actually understood across multiple implementations. These are at the specification stages right now. They are moving through a public, open standardization process. If you are a vendor, if you're an agency that is interested in interoperability and choice, you should track those specs, and if you believe that they are valuable to you, put energy behind it. The other piece of it is obviously around data models itself and interoperability of those data models. The spec that I would point you to, again, we're putting energy behind it for our trade and as well as a variety of other supply chain use cases, is definitely going to be the verifiable claims work that is going on in the W3C as well. And given that I am out of time, happy to answer any questions. I am quite findable, and by all means, feel free to ping us. Happy to share any lessons learned that we have. Thank you.